Look at us being super efficient. We have just finished the Perth market insights and now over to Melbourne. The Again, just sort of reiterating that the purpose of these is so that you can have better conversations with your clients when they are looking at selling. Like I said to the people watching the WA one just a minute ago, the importance of sort of knowing, I think, both markets is actually important because our clients generally either live or own property in both locations. So I would highly recommend that you go back and watch the replay of WA or join us next month with the WA one as well. So at least you understand what's going on for your Melbourne clients. But we will get straight into it. Now, if anyone has any questions at any time, I will just make sure that chat allows for you to put some questions in there. So I will hand it over to you, Reese, to find out what's happening in Melbourne. I think last conversation was more about the long-term benefits of Melbourne, wasn't it, more than anything else?
Yes, correct. You've been listening.
So,
um,
so two-thirds buying in Melbourne. You were just saying before that a third of your clients bought in Perth. Does that mean two-thirds Melbourne?
I would say not the full two-thirds. So we are buying in some other markets in Victoria. So we do like Geelong as well from an affordability play. So I'd say majority, there's a couple other markets, but two-thirds probably Geelong and Melbourne combined. Where we, in an ideal world for an investor, we do like the really blue chip areas are so undervalued in Melbourne right now, and there's actually really good opportunity to get in at the start of the cycle. So I'm talking like inner north, inner east areas that typically you might not be able to get in. You might not be ever able to get into, and at the moment you get into for between 1 and 1.3 million in sort of some of those inner north and inner east, and then we do see some value probably in the southeast, a little bit further out as well. We get a little bit decent land size. So for us, as a investment firm, we always want to look at blue chip assets. So rather than looking at speculative plays, and I think that the challenge with an area like Melbourne is it's been so stagnant for post COVID. And I'm not going to previous ones. I've kind of mentioned what's happened sort of post COVID with debt levels and it's really impacted the price growth, and the main reasons were everyone left, so they had a lot of net negative migration. Looking at that data sets now, people are now coming back, so the data is backing up overseas migration. And when you actually look at a population growth perspective, it's no surprise Melbourne is just behind Perth as the top population growth increase, and that is a percentage of your population. So Melbourne's the biggest city in Australia, so they're actually getting the most people coming into the state than anywhere else. But it is a percentage on growth. And you couple that with some figures that just came out recently where I think they're at an 11-year low for building commencements. So I think a lot of that oversupply Melbourne had in the market when everyone left COVID, they're now starting to slow that down. So kind of goes back to that whole demand and supply fundamentals we look at from a market perspective. It is very, Melbourne's very topical. You got people, and we have a podcast, and Melbourne will come up frequently, and you got such divided opinion about people seeing value versus people, seeing what's been highlighted in the news with the debt levels, the taxes, the crime rates, and it's important, to listen to some of those. Well, not just listen, but actually take notice of some of those data sets, but actually look at the core fundamentals. And for us, where we see the value in Melbourne at the moment is it's been the most consistent market for the last 40 years in Australia. And it was only since COVID we've had the long stagnation. We know why the stagnation happened. Everyone was leaving. People are now coming back. So, and then I mentioned there before, you've obviously got now delays with the supply of new stock. So the market's going to get tightened. Stock on market. Do you know what? I should probably get my slide deck up. That'll probably show you what I'm talking about. So you're looking at, it's go here. So yeah, you're looking at something like this. Now this looks a little bit hectic with stock on market, but this is your median house price versus stock on market. Now Melbourne is, peaking at around 22,000 stock on market during the stagnation period. You're seeing it now starting to drop. Now, why has the stock on market dropped? Investors have left the market. There's no, there's people are holding on to their properties. Whereas now you're starting to see that tick up. So it bottomed out around the 14,000 mark. It's starting to tick up now because there are now starting to be investors enter the market. So stock on market is a good indicator for us to understand, okay, there's less supply, so is that going to increase demand? And then you can actually see here since last month's data got updated, this is the blue line here is the median house price. We've actually now starting to see a strong tick up, and looking at that price growth we've seen there, that's clearly the sharpest price growth we've seen since 2021. So in the last back end of 2021, so there's positive signs there. But what I've got to be clear with, and I probably said this in last month's update, Melbourne is a two-speed market at the moment. You definitely, you're looking at the data. So last month, the price growth was only 0.1%. It was still an increase. You look at that and then you compare, say, a Perth that did 2 or a Adelaide or Brisbane that did 1.5. You're like, well, there's no value there, right? But actually, at the start of the cycle, that's exactly what every area does, is it has slow incremental growth. And to get in the start of a cycle is obviously going to be the most advantageous from a runway perspective. So yes, Perth's doing 2% a month, and me and Ash were just talking about it on the previous call. But you can clearly see Perth doubled in value since the start of its cycle. How much further can that go? So if you do enter the Perth market, you are taking the risk that you are entering at the back end of the cycle. And yes, you might get in the next 12, 18 months the biggest growth you're going to get across the country. But beyond that, are there going to be markets with a bigger runway? And for us, we see Melbourne as an opportunity to get in at the start of the cycle. When we're talking to our investors and we're recommending Melbourne for their strategy, it definitely wouldn't be for quick capital growth. It would be a medium to long-term play. And that's why, and I mentioned this on our previous meeting with the Perth team, but when we're looking at assets, we're looking at blue chip assets that can have a medium to long-term hold. Because in an ideal scenario, depending on the strategy, of course, it could depend on, myself, I'm 35, I'm not retiring anytime soon, so I've got at least 20, 25 years to go until I'm looking to sort of wind down. I'd ideally be looking to get some blue chip assets that I'm going to hold for 20, 25 years. So you want to get good fundamentals that are going to outperform the medium average. And I think what we've seen in Melbourne is, yes, we've seen a tick up as a medium, as a whole, but in some markets, we saw 15% growth last year. Some markets were underwater and down 5-6%. I think the concern you'll see a lot with Melbourne, a lot of investor groups pushing the outer suburbs. So the big one in Victoria is pitching sort of your Meltons of the world, your out west where there's an abundance of land, up north, your Donnybrooks of the world. And why they're pitching that stock to their investors is they're painting the picture probably similar to what the data's showing, where Melbourne's starting to show signs of recovery. So like getting to Melbourne, getting the cheap price. The reason they pitch those areas is there's a huge availability of stock, so it's easy to sell that stock. In a lot of instances, if they're selling in the house, like a house and land package space, there might be a bit of a kickback from the developer or whatnot. Now, those areas, for us, they're speculative areas, and they are areas we'd be concerned to invest in Melbourne at the moment. Melbourne, for us, where you really want to be focusing your energy on is the blue chip suburbs where there's a lot of owner-occupied appeal, good infrastructure, good accessibility to the CBD, and really looking at the core fundamentals that are going to get you into that area. So from a house or a unit perspective, let me just get this. Yeah, we actually do see a lot of value in units in Melbourne. So this graph here is showing you house price versus unit price over the last 25 years. And, as I was mentioning earlier, you can clearly see, Melbourne being a consistent market, always had long period, very consistent growth, had that sharp increase at the start of COVID, and then it's had the stagnation, with everything that happened during COVID. The government's gone bankrupt, everyone's leaving the country, but now obviously the green shoots with people returning. Where we actually see a lot of value from a price point perspective is getting in the unit space. And when I'm talking unit, I'm not talking apartments, I'm talking complexes, ideally at the moment at the start of the cycle, no bigger than 4, but fundamentals less than 10. Really looking at like a villa, a townhouse, something with a bit of a land component that can appreciate. We're really seeing a lot of value in the blue chip inner east, inner north suburbs. You can get a really good unit still below 800,000, which just isn't possible in a capital city, any capital city outside Melbourne at the moment. And what data is going to, from a macro perspective, data is going to help us understand where the market's going to go. But the micro data, so the suburb data, is going to make sure we're buying the right assets in those locations. But looking at this graph here, so it's not ramble, you can clearly see houses and units have followed a similar trajectory for the last 25 years. The gap relatively same the whole period. But what we really saw happen was COVID, with that sharp increase in houses, units doing nothing, then a long period of stagnation. This gap has never been as big. So what that shows us is, historically, and you can see this movement in units and houses, but really from an investor standpoint, they, especially a first-time investor, houses might be unaffordable for them in Melbourne. Like, a lot of the stock we're buying in Melbourne would be nothing under 850. Most of it's going to be 850 plus. There is houses you can get for cheaper than 850, but in terms of the fundamentals that we look at, we would say to our clients, you're going to need at least a budget 850. So if you've got a budget 850 or less, you can get in Melbourne. Like, we bought a really good 2-bed villa last month in a place called Elwood, which is really blue chip suburb, a villa, 300 square meters in a complex of 4, 720. Now, just to give you some comparison, Ash, that area is probably the equivalent of like a Floreat in Western Australia. You ain't getting a villa on that square meters in Floreat for under $1 million. So you should never really compare a market from a price, but it really shows you where we're going to go from an affordability standpoint. So we definitely do see value in the unit market from a price point perspective. But a lot of our clients, the investors have probably already got multiple properties in their portfolio. They've got the capacity there. If they've got the budget of 850 plus, Melbourne houses, we do see a lot of value. And what we're starting to see, though, and what we'd always be saying with our clients, you are getting in at the start of the cycle. So, if we're going to do it, because we do appraisals every 12 months, we're going to be sitting here in 12 months' time doing a portfolio review. And yes, you'll have some growth, but if we compared an asset in Perth that maybe we bought from one of our other investors, they're up 15%, you're not going to get the quick capital growth like you are in Perth. Where you're really going to see the advantage is the runway. And what I mean by the runway is like, how much does the market have to go? And from a Melbourne perspective, this is a bit of a busy line, but this is our affordability index. So what that is our medium household income. How much of that is used for our medium household mortgage repayment? Melbourne's the blue line, Perth's the yellow. I say yellow. A couple of my colleagues are saying this is green. So if someone's saying it's green, it's yellow or green. You can see that Perth and Melbourne are the most affordable capital cities in the country right now. Now, Melbourne historically, it's not at its peak. So historic peak, there's still some wriggle room to go. But Melbourne is, looking at those data sets, the most affordable capital city along with Perth. And if we're sitting here in a month's time, if Perth doesn't have 2% growth, Melbourne will probably become the cheapest capital city. So I think the thing with Melbourne is you've got to be, because it's the start of its cycle, you've really got to understand the core fundamentals of what you're buying. So you don't want to get into the market because you're hearing Melbourne, and you're not buying a compromised asset that's not the right area to be buying in. So it's really, really important to look at sort of core fundamentals as well.
Yeah, so the direct sort of difference, I guess, Perth, I say this lightly and don't hold me to it, but you're probably a lot more flexible where you could buy in Perth, you know what I mean? Like, there's north, south, east, west. It's sort of like there's some benefits in all the areas I would sort of suggest. So in Melbourne, that is definitely something I'm consistently hearing, is that if you buy in Melbourne, you need to be very careful where you purchase. So definitely hearing that a lot. Um, if you, and I speak because the investors that call up, like I said, they'll have multiple properties in Melbourne and Perth. And I'm not going to hold you to this, but if we know that Melbourne is like a great place for long-term holding on, but if you had someone that was wanting to hold on to a property for 15 years, 20 years, and it was a choice of 850 in Perth or 850 in Melbourne, yes, like would it come down to what would it come down to? Would it come down to the mentality of the investor wanting a bit more of a set and forget? Would it come down to potentially Perth performing better, or would it come down to having just a diverse portfolio and get one of each?
You've hit the nail on the head on every single one, and you're completely right. You got to look at not all strategies going to be the same. So you're completely right, Ash. If they've got three or four properties in Melbourne already, they're probably over leveraged from a tax perspective. So actually, maybe Perth getting a blue chip asset at 850 and riding into the next cycle in Perth and get quick capital growth for the next couple of years, and then ride into the next cycle. However, if you had someone who only had one investment property or two in their portfolio, I'd say majority are going to go to Melbourne because it's going to be a longer term. The compounding growth rates are going to be stronger in Melbourne. That is definitely, any clients we're advising we're sending to Melbourne at the moment, it is going to be from a medium to long term play. Like we're actively saying, like the next 12, potentially 24 months, it won't be the best performing market, but you are going to be getting into the market at an affordable price point that you won't be able to get into in 12, 18 months' time. So it will depend on the strategy, but I think all the points you raise there are bang on. It's going to be, you want to look at what the overall strategy is. You want to look at what's their exposure at the moment. And that's really going to help you understand. And is Melbourne and Perth the best markets? Is there an alternative market out there that is going to be best suited for them? So for an example, I mentioned at the start of the call, we're buying a lot in Geelong. And there's two reasons we're buying in Geelong: diversification and affordability. And with Geelong, because it's the start of the cycle, we're getting really good purchases in Geelong. And there's only, with the data that we track, there's only 4 or 5 suburbs we like in Geelong in terms of the overall long-term compounding growth rates, looking at vacancy rates, and yield position. So, Geelong's a big area. There's only 4 or 5 suburbs we're buying in. So we're buying in a really, condensed patch. And why we're sending clients there, A, affordability, because you get a house in the 700s still, and, you can get a nice character home as well in a good blue chip area. Or B, for diversification. Maybe they've already got a house in Melbourne, maybe one in Melbourne, one in Perth. They want to diversify their portfolio, and you can get that something with a land component. So it would really depend on the strategy. I think the core fundamentals of Melbourne, and it reminds us, so our business has been running for over 8 years, and we've bought in multiple cycles. So the Adelaide cycle, the Brisbane cycle, and then the Perth cycle most recently. And what the similar trends of all these, at the start, when you look at data, that's all we can rely on to help form our decision. When we look at the data, everything is seeming, provided an economic event that could change the whole trajectory of the market. Like you only saw what happened with Trump with the tariffs last year, where it really impacted the market for a couple of months and then just went on business as usual. Providing something catastrophic that would change the course of the trajectory, all the start of the indicators in the Melbourne market are very similar to what we saw in those other markets when they started to go on a run as well. And I think the big thing, this is not my feedback, it's one of my business partner, Lachlan, we do a podcast together, and we had a Perth vs Melbourne podcast with local Perth podcaster over here, and one of the things he was bringing up was the crime and the land tax, and that is something that gets a lot of publicity in Melbourne at the moment. The land tax is definitely real, but depending on where you sit from a value perspective, really depends on how much of a hit that has. So, for instance, anything over $1 million worth of land value, that's when it really starts to the land tax starts to increase. Sub $1 million, it's not too far off what some of the other capital cities are doing. And then you've really got to weigh up your options. Like, you're going to get a better growth perspective there, but yeah, okay, maybe you're paying an extra 1,500 a year on tax, but you're really going for capital growth. So that's, we're comfortable from a land tax perspective, and there's ways to get around some of the additional land taxes and structures in terms of trusts or in your personal name. Now, the other one is the crime. And what my colleague said is, like, his sister is on the front line in Melbourne, and because we see it a lot, and I see it a lot, like coming from London, you see all the crime in London getting so much attention here and in the UK. But what she said about Melbourne was, yes, there is a problem there, but what they're trying to do is really put a lot of spotlight on the problem to try to get rid of it. So what they're trying to do is put so much media around anything that happens to make it sense, to try to make a change. So they're trying to do it for positive. There's a positive reason why they're trying to do it, but what she's saying is happening is, from being a doctor on the front line, it's not as bad as what it's perceived. It's out there. It's almost like everything is getting highlighted because the government is really trying to make it stamp down on knife crime or gang violence and stuff like that. Where other cities, you're not seeing the news all the time. So, not saying it's not an issue, but I am saying they're definitely highlighting that issue, and that's probably one of the negative things.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's so interesting. I don't actually think that will work, to be honest. And I have to share a funny story because I was just over in the UK. And got back on the weekend, and it was funny because my partner Linz, he has an insurance business, so he's always over at Lloyd's a couple of times a year, and I said to him, because it was his work trip, and I said, was it less anxious me coming along? Like, did I help you with your coffee and your shirts? And he goes, no. He goes, I had a bit more anxiety. I said, what do you mean you had more anxiety? Like, I was super cool. I didn't call you once. I didn't see you, And he goes, well, no. He goes, I had huge anxiety, you being out on the tubes and out on the streets by yourself. He goes, because of all the stabbings. And I was like, you never told me that there was a high crime rate here. I'm just walking around with my cameras and all of that, and on the tubes with no care in the world. And because I don't actually watch the news or anything like that. And so he had anxiety because he was like, well, actually, if I'm with you, no one's going to touch you. But when you're by yourself, like, I don't know what could happen. But one thing that I did notice over there is that there is so much talk about in the news about the politics and just the crime and all of that. And I really found that people, it puts the fear in them. And it made me realize that I feel like in WA specifically, and maybe Australia, is that I don't feel like we do that as much here. So we're a little bit more oblivious. And it's not really a conversation. Like, they were talking about politics over there, and I was just like, I'm going to go to bed. Like, I don't want to listen to it. And it was just, so it's interesting how the media plays. And I also wonder whether there's a difference in mindset with the investors buying in Melbourne or WA, because I feel that WA were very, very strong when we did have a lockdown, and with our businesses and our grants and how our tenants were looked after very, very well, and still are, as opposed to a place like Melbourne where maybe the government didn't have as much support for them. Is that something that investors would think about or not?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I think that's where we look at, and that's why data is such a key indicator for why we make our decisions. Because we will get a lot of people that have bias. We will have a lot of people that are following the news and hearing these things, like I mentioned, like the taxes, the crime, and everything like that. And that's where we got to show them the core fundamentals as well. So, okay, yes, they're going to be highlighting some of these issues, but like, we'll do a comparison. Okay, well, this is what land tax actually looks like for you. And then when they go, oh, actually, that's not that much. And then we go through these. Here's the core fundamentals. Melbourne's had it's got the lowest vacancy rates in the last 20 years right now, and it's also the rents are the highest it's been in the last 12 years. And then you're looking at population growth; it will be the number one percentage increase probably by the next quarter. So there's a lot of key fundamentals that do drive it, and I think it is important. And Ash, we probably saw that in the Perth market, the East Coast investors buying in areas that locals would never invest in. They saw the value because they saw it was undervalued from a data perspective, and they had no bias to certain suburbs from a micro perspective as well. So, yeah, I think to answer your question, yeah, absolutely. People are going to have concerns, and I think that's where we will educate them on the data sets. And like for instance, like not everyone, people still might be like, nah, I just don't want to do that. Okay, well let's look at another market then. Like I think that's why it's important to be like a national business like we are, where we've got where we've got our fingers in a few different pies or a few different markets that we like, because A, diversification is they need it from portfolio, but B, you might always get that person that doesn't want to invest because they've got strong feelings against it. It's no dissimilar to what I'm finding with all of our Perth clients. They don't want to invest outside the backyard. So although Melbourne is a better place for them, and they're not having, there's no thought process on what I mentioned there with the crime or the taxes. It's purely, I just want to invest. I want to buy a property where I can drive past and see it's there. So there's always going to be a level of that, and that's why we're not emotional investors. We are purely investing from a data perspective. So we take the emotion out. We'll show them the core facts, the core data sets, and then it's up to them to kind of make the decision. But I think it's important when it comes to investing that you do take the emotion out of it, because then you can make strong decisions.
And you should be staying off those Facebook groups and not listening to everyone's personal opinion, and speak to experts like yourself or property managers as well. So what I'm sort of, I guess, I'm also taking from the conversation with Melbourne markets for those that are in property management in Melbourne, is that if it is such a really consistent market in terms of the growth, then I would probably say that a property manager should reflect that consistency with when it comes to the cost and the expenses as well. Where in WA, in comparison, we probably manage it a little bit more, where we're like, okay, you haven't had any expenses or you've got a great income at the moment. Let's, maybe increase some of the things that need to be done around the house. And so we sort of manage maintenance plans in line with that. So I guess from a Melbourne, and I haven't worked in Melbourne property management before, but I would probably say consistent maintenance and expenses would be something that I would put relevance on, just so that, we want the investor's journey to be very consistent on a property management level as what it is on that growth level. So I think managing that would be something that I would focus on. Those consistent maintenance plans.
Absolutely. Proactive property management is key. I think from investors, and me and you actually spoken offline about some of the things you're doing, and within multiple avenues. I think that's exactly what investors need. Because not everyone gets that level of support.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for your time again. I always love chatting. Do you know, I have to say, a month comes around so damn quickly. When I was looking at it again, I was like, are you kidding me? It felt like a couple of weeks we spoke. But we have committed to monthly for till July, and then we'll see sort of how the market goes. So those listening, monthly till sort of that June, July, and then we'll see whether that we continue monthly or whether they're quarterly after that. But it is definitely great just to understand a little bit more, so that our conversations are better with the clients and the client benefits from us all. And of course, at any time your clients are finding it difficult to find an investment property on their own, know that Reece is available with his team to be able to help them as well. So I appreciate your time, Reece. You have a great day. Thank you for those that are listening live or the replay, and we'll speak to you all next month. Bye.